Hi, I'm Zack Semke, director of Passive House Accelerator, and I'm super excited to share Putting the Punk into Passive House with you. Welcome to Part 4, the conclusion. In Part 3, we dove into the progress made so far in the clean energy transition and how that progress is resetting our understanding of where warming is headed. So still not good enough, but important progress. We have solutions and momentum to chart a different path. And growing numbers of young people are pushing back on the doomist narrative, like in this piece in the New York Times. Okay, Doomer, a growing chorus of young people is focusing on climate solutions. Saying it's too late means I don't have to do anything and the responsibility is off me. Here, the climate essayist Mary Heglar says, underneath doomerism and hopium is the question of, are we going to win? That's premature at this point. We need to ask ourselves if we're going to try. We don't know until we try if we're going to win. And Heglar's use of the term hopium reminds me of the distinction between complacent optimism and conditional optimism made by Paul Romer, who recently won the Nobel Prize in Economics for his work on climate change and the learning rates of endogenous technological change. Heglar's hopium is Romer's complacent optimism. Here's what Romer says. Complacent optimism is the feeling of a child waiting for presents. Conditional optimism is the feeling of a child who's thinking about building a treehouse. If I get some wood and nails and persuade other kids to help do the work, we can end up with something really cool. Christina Figueres, co-host of the Outrage and Optimism podcast, and the former UN climate chief who successfully ushered the Paris Climate Accord to completion, notes both the climate destruction that we're already experiencing, as well as the progress we're making to bend the curve, and calls for us to hold both outrage and optimism as we work for climate action. She says, by assuming one reaction or the other, outrage or optimism, we force ourselves into a box. We risk reducing our thinking and acting according to a binary mentality that can drive polarization at a time where acting in solidarity with each other is ever more important. The complexity of the climate crisis and its solutions means we need to get used to holding complex emotional reactions and to pursuing complex solutions. The path ahead will be full of outrage and optimism. We can use both of those to push for the policies we know we need. And the Carbon Tracker Initiative, one of my favorite sources of insights on the clean energy transition, argues that it's time for us to flip the script on collective climate action to one of gain, not pain. Quote, mitigating climate change is no longer an expensive collective action problem. It is a technology revolution with enormous wealth generating and redistributive potential. Still, we're so good at envisioning nightmares when it comes to imagining the future. Some really entertaining pop culture and aesthetic movements like cyberpunk, steampunk, and dieselpunk fixate on apocalypse. And it can be reassuring to watch or read this work. It's heartening to see our protagonists surviving and even carrying on normal human relationships in the midst of catastrophe. This image from Blade Runner is perfectly bleak because it imagines an apocalypse where the clean energy transition has utterly failed. Those mirrors from a concentrating solar thermal power facility have been rendered useless by the pollution-choked sky as our hero buzzes by in his flying car. Here he is in Los Angeles with its destroyed infrastructure. Apparently, there are no trees left. We see the skeleton of one being propped up like some relic. The Road Warrior and Mad Max movies have been imagining climate apocalypse for decades now. It's a world of emaciated, unhappy people. In Maze Runner, we see the desertification of our cities, even where rivers once flowed, and destroyed buildings. Here's an example of steampunk or dieselpunk with coal smoke spewing out of this village of the future. Here's a Blade Runner-like image of a cyberpunk future. And this one is pure dieselpunk. That's an oil refinery in the background, I think. And what is that? Some sort of flying oil refinery? In any case, it's an arresting image. And I'm certainly not the first to point out that MLK did not say, I have a nightmare. He was firmly grounded in the realities of American racism, of course. And from that place, he said, I have a dream. He spoke of going to the mountaintop and looking out on the promised land, and he articulated a vision of the future that people could rally around and fight for. And there's power in envisioning the future we want to make manifest. And let's just take a moment to imagine what's on the other side of this clean energy transition. The things that will be true even if that transition takes longer than we want it to. For one, petrostates will lose power over others, something that is top of mind right now as Russia invades Ukraine, yet international sanctions are undermined by our dependence on Russian oil and gas. Will the clean energy transition be a force for peace? According to the UN Development Program, the shift to renewable energy will mean big gains in energy self-sufficiency for nearly all nations of the world. The deeper the shade of blue you see on this image, the more self-sufficient a nation becomes with the clean energy transition. Not surprisingly, lots of those deep blue countries are in the global south, suggesting that the transition could help advance equity as well. And I'd argue that the same sort of map probably applies at the community scale too. And remember that the clean energy transition will bring massive health gains. According to the Harvard School of Public Health, 1 in 5 deaths worldwide are due to fossil fuel air pollution today. When we make the shift away from burning, that's going to disappear. And we got a little glimpse into that future during the early major lockdowns of the COVID pandemic. Here's New Delhi and Los Angeles, and I don't even recognize this city. And according to the inventor, scientist, and electrify everything powerhouse Saul Griffith, we'll thrive at 1/340th the waste, as Saul says here, assigning all 328 million Americans equal share of our fossil fuel use. Every American burns 1.6 tons of coal, 1.5 tons of natural gas, and 3.1 tons of oil every year. That becomes around 17 tons of carbon dioxide, none of which is captured. It's all tossed like trash into the atmosphere. The same US lifestyle could be achieved with around 110 pounds each of wind turbines, solar modules, and batteries per person per year. Except that all of those are quite recyclable and getting more recyclable all the time. So there's reason to believe it will amount to only 5 to 100 pounds per year of stuff that winds up as trash. That's a huge difference. 35,000 pounds of waste for our lifestyles the old way versus 100 pounds the new electrified way. And let's not forget that when we complete the transition that we need to make, buildings will have played a huge part in getting us there. This chart from IRENA, the International Renewable Energy Agency, shows the annual investments necessary to meet a 1.5 degrees Celsius scenario. Over $3.8 trillion per year needs to go to clean energy and infrastructure investments. Let's note that this doesn't necessarily mean extra investments. Much of this means diverting existing investments from dirty energy to clean. If you look carefully, the biggest number on the chart is the $963 billion per year that needs to be invested into improving the energy efficiency of buildings. This is a massive opportunity for Passive House designers and builders. So when we consider what lies on the other side of the clean energy transition, maybe it's time for a different vision. Enter the aesthetic and literary movement called Solarpunk. Solarpunk is a response to cyberpunk. It recognizes that if we spend all of our energy imagining apocalypse, then we won't have any left to envision the future that we actually want to build. Solarpunks ask, what kind of world will emerge when we finally transition to renewables? So Solarpunk recognizes that we aren't making that transition fast enough, but it imagines what we can create when the transition finally happens. Solarpunk begins with infrastructure as a form of resistance. I love this. So that protected bike lane is a form of resistance. That streetcar is a form of resistance. The high-speed rail linking cities is resistance. That multifamily passive house building is resistance. The Solarpunk manifesto starts with this: optimism has been taken away from us, and we are trying to take it back. Punk owns outrage, right? I mean, outrage is the essence of punk. What Solarpunk is doing is keeping that outrage, but reclaiming optimism, recognizing that we need both. It goes straight back to the outrage and optimism of Christina Figueres. To create the future we want, we need to hold these two emotions simultaneously. Here's the cover of a recent issue of Solarpunk magazine, with an Extinction Rebellion activist holding two spray cans, one that sprays live doves and the other that sprays live plants. Here's another Extinction Rebellion activist spraying a vertical garden onto a wall as an act of rebellion. So there's a post-capitalist revolutionary vibe to Solarpunk. Ironically though, the creative piece that really popularized Solarpunk was this ad for Chobani yogurt entitled Dear Alice. It looks like it's straight out of a Studio Ghibli film. I half expect My Neighbor Totoro to walk through or the cat bus to speed across the hills. We see our hero connected to the land, sipping her tea. Her bike is on the right. Some sort of high-tech farming operation is going on in that barn. Solar panels are integrated with crops in the distance. Floating wind turbines fly like kites. And a glimmering city sits in the distance. Here we see her using technology to harvest fruit from the orchard and load it into a crate labeled donations, pointing to community connection and a sense of community responsibility in this future. I'm not sure what's going on here, but she's using technology to cultivate the land, I guess. Clean energy is integrated throughout the landscape. Here we see Bloomberg Green getting in on the Solarpunk trend with towers of container housing. It seems like we can never get away from container architecture. Anyway, the containers are integrated with solar panels and vertical gardens. A farmer's market is on the right, electrified jitneys speed along, and the ubiquitous floating wind turbines hover nearby. Here we see the Solarpunk infrastructure of a rail line in Disney's Zootopia. Here's Solarpunk infrastructure with a city in the background. I'm not exactly sure what's going on here. Is this a ship, a submarine? Does it hover? In any case, it's connected to the ocean. It's a community. It's powered by clean energy. There are a lot of plants and technology going on. Solarpunk visions of future architecture are definitely fascinated by trees on buildings. It's hard not to think of all the weight and the concrete and the embodied carbon involved, so I think that architects and passive house designers and builders can help inform and refine these Solarpunk visions of buildings. But it's a beautiful image with buildings and trees and solar panels integrated with one another. There's also a strong rewilding element to Solarpunk art. This city looks like it's partly being reclaimed by the forest, with new buildings embracing that vegetation. And in the distance, we see abandoned cooling towers from the before times. I don't know exactly what's happening with these cylinders of plant life, but we have the Solarpunk infrastructure of that glass train speeding through. The movie Black Panther is a great example of Solarpunk combined with Afrofuturism. This streetscape shows a streetcar, bustling pedestrian life, and buildings that are responding sensibly to that powerful sunshine. This looks a bit more like how Passive House might integrate with Solarpunk visions. There's a maglev train on the right there. Again, infrastructure as resistance. Looks like an amazing place to live. This sort of fanciful glass plus plants architecture of Solarpunk is showing up in Jeff Bezos' vision for Amazon architecture, hardly post-capitalist. Here we see him in one of the Bezos balls, as we call them in Seattle, the Amazon spheres at HQ1. And here's the approved design for HQ2 in Virginia, a kind of Solarpunk poop emoji. According to MVC magazine, this building, now completed, is the largest eco-friendly tower in Taiwan. Now, my landscape designer past self would have loved this, and those balconies do look really nice, but from an energy performance standpoint, and certainly from an embodied carbon standpoint, it's hard to take the eco-friendly claim seriously. Again, Passive House practitioners have lots to contribute, I think, to Solarpunk visions of architecture. In fact, I think Passive House is Solarpunk. I mean, take a look at these key points from the Solarpunk manifesto. First, Solarpunk is a vision of a future that embodies the best of what humanity can achieve. That's our vision for buildings. How can we create havens of health, happiness, and resilience for the people who live, work, and play in Passive House buildings? Second, the punk in Solarpunk is about going in a different direction than the mainstream. Any Passive House practitioner will tell you that we are bucking the norm. Construction is a famously conservative and slow to innovate industry. Yet we're advocating for revolutionary gains in performance and occupant experience. No small task. Third, Solarpunk is a movement about how we get there. It's not just about stories. It's about building the future. That's what we're doing in Passive House. Finally, there's no single right way to do Solarpunk. You can be doing Solarpunk by spraying vertical gardens on walls. You can be doing Solarpunk by marching in the streets. You can be doing Solarpunk by advocating for Passive House incentives and policies at the city, county, state, or federal level. Or you can be doing Solarpunk by sitting at your desk and designing your next building, or with your tool belt on, building your next building. And make no mistake, the world needs us to be punk. The Intergovernmental Panel on Climate Change needs us to be punk. This chart comes from IPCC's recent Working Group 3 report on climate change mitigation. To achieve the low demand scenario by 2050, the IPCC needs the building sector, depicted in orange, to reduce primary energy through efficiency improvements, final energy through the machines we put in our buildings, and useful energy through high-performance building shells. This is Passive House. Only then Will we have the wiggle room to make the increases in energy demand necessary to meet the UN's Sustainable Development Goals as part of the transition? We know that when we combine Passive House with carbon sequestering materials and electrify everything and provide that electricity from clean energy sources, that we approach zero carbon building. But this is also Solarpunk Bad-Assery. That electrification piece is really important because the electric machines we are talking about use way less energy than their fossil counterparts. Heat pumps, with their coefficients of performance of 3 or even 4, use just a fraction of the energy of a gas boiler. Combine that with Passive House design, and we've got a new definition of Solarpunk architecture. The genius of Passive House is that it recognizes that the building itself, not just the machines that go into it, is technology. Its skeleton and skin, and how all the building components function together as a system, is technology. So, just as in solar and wind and in batteries, we can harness the power of learning by doing. As a reminder, these Passive House design principles come together to create this new Passive House technology. So, continuous insulation, no thermal bridges, airtight construction, high-performance windows and doors, fresh air ventilation with heat recovery, shading, orientation and form, daylighting and solar gain, moisture management, and efficient domestic hot water and distribution. Now, anyone who's been involved in more than a couple of Passive House projects will tell you that learning by doing is a real thing. You'll hear anecdote after anecdote about how the first project that you do will be challenging, but the second gets easier and therefore cheaper, and the third gets easier still, and so on. It looks like we're seeing this learning by doing with Passive House on a regional industry-wide scale too. Data from the Pennsylvania Housing Finance Agency compares construction budgets for 268 proposed multifamily projects over a 3-year period. 194 conventional buildings and 74 Passive House buildings. Construction costs went up during that 3-year period, which is something that all of us can relate to. But interestingly, the construction cost of the proposed Passive House buildings increased slower than the proposed conventional buildings. In year 1, there's a 5.8% cost premium for the Passive House proposals compared to conventional buildings. By year 2, that goes down to 1.6%. And by year 3, there's a 3.3% savings for the proposed Passive House buildings compared to the proposed conventional buildings. This trend is totally consistent with the notion that Passive House technology is benefiting from learning by doing and is enjoying a learning rate that's bringing costs down. As I've said, Passive House is Solarpunk. It's Solarpunk because it creates buildings that are healthy havens for people. Passive House is comfortable, healthy, quiet, free of dust and bugs, free of unwanted moisture and odors, durable, it brings predictable performance, it's affordable, energy efficient, it's compatible with low embodied carbon architecture and electrification, and it's resilient to the vagaries of climate change. Passive House reduces energy demand, which makes the clean energy transition easier, which makes a Solarpunk future possible. This example comes from RDH Building Science. On the left, we see a burned out 6-unit apartment building in Bella Bella, British Columbia. On the right, a new PHI certified Passive House building. Same number of units, same site, same size. The Passive House building uses less than half the energy of the original building. And, thanks to electrification, it slashes the operational carbon intensity of the building by 90%. As important as reduced demand is, the cool kids know that what's really important is reduced load, both on a daily and on a seasonal basis. In this infographic from the Passive House Trust in the UK, we see the energy load of a typical home. The conventional home's weak building envelope means that in the winter, internal temperatures drop quickly whenever the heat is turned down. So the home sees 2 big spikes in heating power, once in the morning when the household wakes up and another time in the evening when kids and grown-ups return home. These spikes coincide with similar spikes from millions of other homes, stressing electricity and gas grids. The Passive House, on the other hand, sips a tiny bit of power throughout the day, acting as a good grid citizen. No spikes in load, no stress. The same principle operates on a seasonal basis too. The superior thermal envelopes of Passive House buildings act like a long-term thermal battery, sipping a bit of energy from the grid and not stressing it. All of this means that the future clean grid will require fewer clean energy resources to heat and cool our Passive House buildings, which makes the clean energy transition easier, which makes the Solarpunk future possible. And this is maybe the most punk thing about Passive House buildings. Passive resilience is Solarpunk. The project team of this Passive House Institute certified low-energy building in New York's Hudson Valley tested its winter resilience by turning off its heat pump for a week in January. Outdoor temperatures dipped down to negative 10 degrees Fahrenheit on day 7, but indoor temperatures never dipped below 50 degrees Fahrenheit. And that was without the free internal heat gains from people because the house was unoccupied during the experiment. Teresa Passive House is another example of punk-like resilience, this time in Austin, Texas. A FIAS certified home, Teresa Passive went through the Texas deep freeze that cut power for several days in a row. Despite sub-freezing temperatures, the internal temps stayed above 50 degrees Fahrenheit, which again, it's not comfortable, but it's definitely survivable with a coat on or under a few blankets. Nearby houses had their pipes freeze, but Teresa Passive emerged unscathed. So here's where we're at. We're in a race with the climate crisis. It's full of scary, destructive, vicious cycles with the power of exponential, nonlinear change. And we should be outraged by its impacts and by efforts by too many to slow down climate action. We should be outraged. But on the climate solution side, we also have exponential power. Power that can accelerate virtuous circles to destroy demand for fossil fuels and ultimately halt climate change. At the heart of many of these virtuous circles is the power of learning by doing. And if you're skeptical of that power, remember that the reason that we are still in this race and have a chance to keep warming below 2 degrees Celsius is that technologies like solar, wind, and batteries have plummeted in price to become the no-brainer choice for powering our world. That same learning by doing can also apply to Passive House design and construction. And considering that buildings are responsible for about 40% of greenhouse gas emissions globally, that's a big deal. If you design, build, own, or advocate for good buildings, you have a starring role to play in building a Solarpunk future. So let's do it. I want to close with this image, my favorite piece of Solarpunk artwork. It was created by Jessica Wolf, who also worked on that Chobani yogurt ad we saw earlier. I guess I love it because it shows a parent and a child, and a healthy landscape of farm and forest, and those ubiquitous floating wind turbines. Maybe that parent is one of my kids in the future, and that child is my grandchild. Anyway, it's a beautiful scene. And it looks like that house on the left could really use a Passive House retrofit, so I hope you'll join me there to help me with that. Thanks for watching, and be well, my fellow Solarpunks. To learn more about Passive House, please subscribe to our YouTube channel, visit PassiveHouseAccelerator.com, and join in at our Passive House Accelerator Live Zoom events on Wednesdays. Thanks for watching.